The wind carved ghosts from the red desert, lifting veils of dust across the bones of Iron Ridge in the dying light of November 1876. Ursula Hartwell knelt in the hard-packed dirt behind the collapsed assay office. Her fingers wrapped around the hilt of a cavalry saber whose tip had broken off somewhere in a forgotten skirmish. The steel felt cold, even through the worn cotton of her gloves. And the blade trembled not from the wind, but because her hands would not stop shaking. Across from her, close enough that she could see the dark flecks in his eyes and count the shallow breaths that lifted his chest, knelt Chaska Wind in Trees. Blood had dried in thin lines along his knuckles, evidence of hard travel and harder fights. His buckskin shirt bore the dust and sweat of a man who had been running for days, and his face was a mask of controlled tension, every muscle locked in place. He was Oglala Lakota, perhaps 28 or 30 winters by the faint lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. And he held the other end of the saber with a grip that did not waver. The silence stretched between them like a bowstring pulled taut, the moment crystallizing into something sharp and dangerous. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the faint metallic ticking of the repaired telegraph relay pulsed through the stillness, each click a heartbeat of information flowing along the military line that snaked across the territories. She had rigged that relay herself, scavenging parts from railroad junk and mending frayed wires with hands that remembered her father's patient lessons back in Boston, a lifetime and 1,000 miles ago. Ursula's breath came shallow and quick, each inhalation catching in her throat. Her calico dress, once a respectable shade of blue, hung torn at the hem and patched with canvas scraps. Dirt rimmed her nails, and her once soft hands were calloused and scarred from weeks of survival. She had not seen a mirror in months, but she knew her face must be gaunt, her cheeks hollowed by sparse meals and constant vigilance. Still she met his stare without flinching, holding his gaze with a defiance born of desperation and something deeper, a refusal to be another casualty of this brutal land. "If you're going to kill me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt each word measured and deliberate, "do it. Otherwise, lower the blade." Chaska's expression did not change. His jaw was set, the muscles tight beneath bronze skin, weathered by sun and wind. A thin scar curved above his left eyebrow, white against the darker skin. For a long moment, 5 heartbeats, 10, a small eternity, she thought he might actually swing and the saber might end this strange standoff, with a single swift motion. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but she refused to look away. Then slowly, deliberately, he shifted his weight. Instead of striking, he angled the broken blade flat between them, resting it on the ground, with the hilt still in his hand. "Talk," he said. His voice was low, roughened by thirst and the long silence of solitary travel. Ursula exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her fingers loosened slightly on the hilt, but she did not let go. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. The wind gusted, stirring the fine red sand that coated everything in this forsaken town. Iron Ridge had been a silver boomtown once, but the veins had run dry and the people had drifted away like tumbleweeds, leaving only the wind and the ghosts. And now, the two of them kneeling in the dirt with a broken sword between them. She swallowed, tasting dust and fear. "You followed the signal," she said. It was not a question. He nodded once. 3 nights. I thought you were Army, sending messages to the patrols, hunting my people. I'm not Army, she said quickly. I'm eavesdropping on them, stealing their intelligence, trying to stay alive. His eyes narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Why? Because I have nowhere else to go. The admission cost her something, but she saw the flicker of understanding in his gaze. Recognition that passed between two people who knew what it meant to be hunted. Chaska glanced past her toward the ridge where the relay station sat hidden. You repair that station alone. Yes. You know the code. Every group, every cipher. I've been listening for weeks. His thumb brushed the edge of the saber, a deliberate movement. Then, in a gesture that surprised her, he reached across the blade and gently lifted her hand from the hilt. His fingers were calloused and warm, and the touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. She did not pull away. "Then we have a problem," he said quietly, "because I need information the army has, and you need something I can give protection." Ursula's throat tightened. "What information?" "A doctor, army contract physician, traveling with medicines, vaccination kit, cowpox, lymph laudanum for the pain, carbolic to clean wounds, and careful nursing. He is coming through this territory and I must find him before the patrols do." "Why?" But even as she asked, she understood. Smallpox. The rumors had been circulating for weeks. Chaska's jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw the shadow of pain cross his features. "My sister, Winona, smallpox. Without medicine, she will die." The words hung in the air between them, stark and brutal. Ursula felt something twist in her chest, empathy recognition. She had watched her younger brother die of fever when she was 12, had seen him slip away, despite every prayer. "I can help you find him," she said, the decision made before she fully understood why. "But you have to trust me. You have to." Chaska studied her face, searching for deception. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he released the saber entirely and shifted to kneel beside her shoulder, to shoulder both of them facing the ridge. The proximity was startling. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the first time in months she had been this close to another human being who did not mean her harm. The telegraph relay ticked again. Chaska tilted his head, listening. "What does it say?" Ursula closed her eyes, translating the pattern. "Patrol route, heading northwest at dawn, searching for..." She stopped, her eyes snapping open. "For what?" Chaska's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "For Lakota stragglers. After Little Bighorn, they want blood." She turned to him, urgency tightening her voice. "They're sweeping this whole region. If you're alone out here, I know the risks. Do you?" She grabbed his forearm, her fingers closing around solid muscle. "They're not taking prisoners. They're shooting on sight." Chaska looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, a hairline crack in the stoic mask. "Then we move fast, together." A sound cut through the wind and the distant rumble of hooves. They both froze. On the western horizon, a thin line of dust rose into the amber sky. Riders, at least 5, moving toward the town at a steady trot. "The relay," Ursula hissed. "If they find it, we hide it, now." They sprinted across the open ground, the broken saber abandoned. Ursula's boots slipped on loose gravel, and Chaska caught her elbow without breaking stride. They reached the ridge and ducked behind the tumbled remains of a miner's shack, where the telegraph relay sat nestled in a crevice. Ursula dropped to her knees and began disconnecting the leads with shaking fingers. Chaska crouched beside her, his gaze locked on the approaching dust trail. The riders were closer now. "How long?" he asked. 30 seconds. Too long. His hand closed over hers, stilling the frantic motion. "Leave it. We go now." "But now." They bolted down the far side of the ridge. Behind them, the riders crested the rise, their shouts carrying on the wind. Ursula heard the metallic click of rifles being cocked. They ran. The sandstorm came from nowhere, as they always did in the territories, a wall of red fury that turned day into twilight and filled the air with stinging grit. Ursula and Chaska had been moving east for 2 hours using the broken terrain to mask their tracks when the wind shifted and the sky darkened with terrifying speed. There, Chaska pointed to a rock outcropping barely visible through the thickening dust. They ran for it as the storm hit with full force, the wind howling like a living thing, sand blasting exposed skin with the force of tiny bullets. They reached the overhang and pressed themselves into the shallow depression beneath it, gasping and coughing. The storm raged around them, reducing visibility to arm's length. Sand infiltrated everything: clothing, hair, eyes, mouth. Ursula pulled her collar up over her nose and mouth, but it did little good. "How long?" she shouted over the wind. Chaska shook his head. "Hours, maybe more." He shifted, trying to make more room in the cramped space, and his shoulder pressed against hers. "We wait." They had no choice. Moving in a storm like this meant death, disorientation, exposure, burial in drifting sand. So they huddled together in the darkness, sharing body heat as the temperature plummeted the storm, stripping away the day's warmth with vicious efficiency. Time lost meaning. Minutes or hours passed in the howling darkness. Ursula's teeth chattered uncontrollably, despite Chaska's warmth beside her. She had never felt cold like this, a cold that seeped into bones and made every breath an effort. "Tell me about Boston," Chaska said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the wind. "What?" She turned her head toward him, though she could barely see his face in the darkness. "Tell me about your home. It will help. Keep your mind working." She understood. The killing cold that makes a body sleepy made people drowsy, made them want to sleep. Sleep in a storm like this meant death. So she talked, her words stumbling at first, then finding rhythm. She told him about her father's workshop, about learning the telegraph code by candlelight, about the smell of solder and copper wire. She told him about her brother's death, about the mill owner who had framed her, about running west with nothing but a carpetbag and fear. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Then Chaska spoke, his voice low and rough. "Winona is 12 winters. She laughs like water over stones. She wanted to learn to hunt, so I taught her. Our father said daughters should not hunt, but I taught her anyway." He paused. 3 weeks ago, the first red spots appeared. Now, his voice cracked. Now she burns with fever and cannot recognize my mother's face. Ursula's throat tightened. Without thinking, she reached for his hand in the darkness and found it. His fingers closed around hers, the grip almost painful in its intensity. "We'll find the doctor," she said. "We'll save her." "You cannot promise that." "No, but I can promise to try." Something shifted in the darkness, a subtle change in the quality of Chaska's silence. Then he said quietly, "Why?" "Because you would do the same." She did not know how she knew this, but she did. In the brief hours since their standoff, she had seen enough of his character to understand that he was a man who honored obligations, who protected those weaker than himself. The storm raged on, but in their small shelter something fragile and new was being born. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. Dawn broke gray and cold, the storm having passed in the night. They emerged from their shelter to find the landscape transformed, familiar landmarks buried or reshaped by drifting sand. Ursula's body ached from the cramped position and the cold, and her throat was raw from breathing dust all night. Chaska surveyed the terrain with narrowed eyes. "We are off course. Must find landmarks." They spent the morning navigating by the sun and distant mountains, moving cautiously through terrain that could hide dangers, rattlesnakes, unstable ground, or worse, other people. Near midday, they found a seasonal creek bed with a trickle of water still running. They drank carefully, knowing that bad water could kill as surely as a bullet. As Ursula splashed water on her face, she heard Chaska make a warning sound. She froze her hand, moving to the rusted revolver tucked in her belt. 3 men emerged from behind a jumble of boulders, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men who lived by taking from others. Road agents, bandits. The territories were full of them, men displaced by war or drawn by the promise of easy pickings. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, grinned when he saw Ursula. "Well now, what have we here, a squaw man and his woman?" Chaska did not respond. His hand rested near his knife, his body coiled and ready. "We don't want trouble," Ursula said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No trouble at all," Scarface said, still grinning. "Just hand over anything worth taking and we'll be on our way. That's a nice carbine you got there, Chief." The 2 men flanking him spread out, trying to get angles on Chaska. It was a practiced movement. These men had done this before. Chaska's eyes flicked to Ursula, then back to the bandits. She understood. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Fighting would likely get them both killed. But surrendering the Spencer and her revolver would leave them defenseless in country where being defenseless meant death. The moment stretched taut. Then one of the flanking men made a mistake. He let his attention drift to Ursula for just a second too long, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Chaska moved, not toward Scarface, but toward the distracted man, closing the distance in 2 explosive strides. His knife flashed, not to kill, but to disable a quick slash across the man's gun hand that sent the rifle clattering to the rocks. Ursula did not freeze. She grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it at the second flanker with all her strength. It caught him square in the face, breaking his nose in a spray of blood. He staggered back, cursing. Scarface swung his rifle toward Chaska, but Ursula had already drawn her revolver. "Don't," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The gun wavered in her hands, but at this distance, even a shaking shot could kill. Scarface assessed the situation, 1 man down, clutching a bleeding hand, another with blood pouring from his nose, and a woman pointing a gun at his chest. Not the easy pickings he had anticipated. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "Walk away," Ursula said. "Take your men and walk away. We have nothing worth dying for." For a long moment she thought he would call her bluff. Her revolver had 3 cartridges, maybe. 1 might be a misfire. If he rushed them, if his men had any fight left, Scarface spat into the dust. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is." Chaska said, his knife still in hand, blood dripping from the blade. "You tell others. This woman, this man, we are not easy prey. Spread that word." Something in his tone, flat, absolute, carrying the weight of a promise, made Scarface reconsider. He gestured to his men, and they retreated, the wounded men, stumbling, throwing curses over their shoulders. Only when they disappeared behind the rocks did Ursula lower the revolver. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Chaska took it gently from her and checked the cylinder. 3 cartridges, as she had thought. 1 had a cracked casing, it would have misfired. He looked at her, and something new was in his eyes, respect, acknowledgement. "You did not run. Neither did you." Her voice came out shaky, a hard rush of fear turning to tremors now that the danger had passed. "We fight well together." It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. In that moment, standing in the dry creek bed with blood on the rocks and her heart still racing, Ursula understood that they had crossed some invisible threshold. They were no longer 2 strangers forced together by circumstance. They were something else, partners maybe, or the beginning of something that had no easy name. Chaska cleaned his knife on his pants and sheathed it. "We should move. They might come back with more." Ursula nodded. But as they gathered their few belongings and prepared to leave, she caught his eye and said, "Thank you." "For what?" for not hesitating, for trusting that I would act. Chaska's expression softened fractionally. You have warrior heart. I saw it when we first met. Why else would you face me with broken blade? She had no answer to that. So she simply fell into step beside him as they continued east, and the distance between them felt smaller than it had before. They reached Coyote Ford at dusk, 3 days later, exhausted and low on water. The settlement was little more than a rail shack, a handful of homesteads scattered across the flat plain, and a one-room schoolhouse perched on a low hill. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray column, and the scent of cooking food made Ursula's stomach clench with hunger. A woman emerged from the schoolhouse as they approached May Trumbull, perhaps 35 years old, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that assessed them with sharp intelligence. She wore a simple dress covered by a work apron, and her hands showed the calluses of hard labor. You look half dead, she said bluntly, then gestured toward the schoolhouse. Come, I have stew and coffee. Ursula wanted to weep with gratitude. They followed May inside, where warmth from the pot-bellied stove enveloped them like a benediction. The schoolhouse was orderly with rows of wooden benches, a slate board covered in arithmetic problems, and shelves lined with well-worn books. May ladled stew into tin bowls and poured coffee so strong it could strip paint. Eat first, talk after. They obeyed, too hungry and tired to argue. The stew was simple beans and salt pork and potatoes, but it tasted like heaven. Ursula felt strength seeping back into her limbs with each bite. When they finished, May poured more coffee and sat across from them, her hands folded on the rough wooden table. Now, who are you and why are you here? Ursula glanced at Chaska, unsure how much to reveal. But something in May's direct gaze suggested that lies would be pointless. So she told the truth about fleeing Boston, about the telegraph relay, about Chaska's search for the doctor. May listened without interrupting her expression, giving nothing away. When Ursula finished, silence stretched for a long moment. Then May said, Dr. Ezra Pike, Army contract physician. He's supposed to pass through Red Butte in 3 days, then continue to the reservation. Hope flared in Chaska's eyes. You are certain? I keep track of who comes and goes on the rail line. It's how I survive knowing things. May refilled their coffee cups, her movements precise and controlled. But there's a complication. Edison Rook, the mine owner, has been pressuring the territorial governor to clear the Lakota camps along the rail spur. He wants the land for a rail extension to his silver mines. How? Ursula asked. Quarantine orders. There's smallpox in some of the camps. She glanced at Chaska, her expression softening fractionally, and Rook's using it as justification to declare the whole area a health hazard. He's got Deputy Bram Kincaid in his pocket, along with a dozen hired guns. Chaska's jaw tightened. They will force my people off the land. Or worse. May's voice was grim. I've seen the telegrams. Rook's planning something at Dry Trestle. He's moving a work engine and box cars there supposedly for repairs, but I don't believe it. Ursula felt ice creeping down her spine. What do you think he's planning? I think he's going to lure the families there with promises of medical help, then use force to disperse them. Make it look like they were resisting quarantine orders. Gives him legal cover to seize the land. May paused, her eyes hardening. I lost my husband to men like Rook. Railroad accident, they said. But I know different. He found out about some land speculation scheme, and suddenly there was a collapsed trestle that killed him and 2 other men. You cannot prove this, Chaska asked. No. That's why Rook's still walking free. Bitterness crept into May's voice. But I've been watching him for 3 years. waiting for a chance to expose what he really is. Something in her tone made Ursula uneasy, an edge that went beyond righteous anger into something darker. But exhaustion dulled her instincts, and the warmth of the stove was making her drowsy. "Rest here tonight," May said, her voice softening. "Tomorrow we can plan. You'll need help if you're going up against Rook." Ursula wanted to ask more questions, wanted to probe the shadows she sensed in May's story. But her eyes were closing despite her best efforts, and when May led them to a small storage room with blankets laid out on the floor, she sank into sleep within seconds of lying down. The next morning, May provided them with supplies, hardtack dried apples, a canteen of clean water. She also gave them something unexpected, a detailed map of the area around Dry Trestle, marked with patrol routes and Rook's holdings. "How did you get this?" Ursula asked, studying the careful notations. "I told you I keep track of things." May's expression was unreadable. "There's more. I have black powder from the old mine at Iron Ridge. If you need to make a distraction or—" She paused. "Something more permanent, I can provide it." Chaska frowned. "Why do you help us?" "Because I want Rook to pay for what he's done. And because—" May's voice dropped. "I've been waiting 3 years for the right moment to strike. You two might be that moment." The unease Ursula had felt the night before returned stronger now. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we stop Rook, whatever it takes." May's eyes were hard, glittering with something that might have been righteousness, or might have been something less noble. "He's planning to move at Dry Trestle in 4 days. We need to be there first. Warn the families, yes, but also we need to end this. Destroy his operation so thoroughly that he can't rebuild." "And if innocent people are caught in the middle?" Ursula asked carefully. "Then we do our best to get them clear first." May's tone suggested this was a calculated risk she was willing to take. Chaska and Ursula exchanged glances. They needed help that was undeniable. But something about May's intensity troubled them both. Still, what choice did they have? Time was running short, and the families at Dry Trestle were walking into a trap. "We'll work with you," Ursula said slowly. "But we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks to the people we're trying to save." May nodded, but Ursula caught a flicker of something in her eyes, impatience maybe, or calculation. "Of course. I want justice, not a massacre." But the way she said justice made Ursula wonder exactly what that word meant to May Trumbull. They spent the next 3 days preparing. May taught Ursula the basics of working with black powder, how to pack it, how to wire it, how to create a timed fuse. Chaska scouted the terrain around Dry Trestle, memorizing every gully and rock formation, finding routes that could be used for escape or ambush. In the evenings, they gathered in the schoolhouse to plan. May produced telegrams she had intercepted showing the coordination between Rook and Kincaid. One message in particular caught Ursula's attention. It was addressed to someone identified only as RM, and spoke of eliminating the problem permanently once the land is clear. "Who's RM?" Ursula asked. May shrugged. "I don't know. Someone back east, maybe. A financier backing Rook's operations." But something about the telegram bothered Ursula. The phrasing was odd, the cipher group slightly off from standard military code. She filed the observation away, too busy with immediate concerns to pursue it further. On the 3rd evening, as they sat around the stove reviewing final plans, Chaska suddenly said, "May Trumbull, your husband's death. How did you learn it was not accident?" May's expression closed off. "I found papers in his belongings, notes about irregularities in Rook's land purchases. When I tried to take them to the authorities, they disappeared. Someone broke into my house and took everything." "But you remember what was in them?" Ursula said. Every word. May's voice was hard as stone. That's why I've been collecting evidence ever since. That's why I know exactly how Rook operates. Chaska studied her for a long moment. Revenge's sharp knife cuts both ways. I'm aware of the risks. May met his gaze steadily. But some things are worth the cost. Later, as Ursula and Chaska prepared to sleep in the small storage room, he said quietly, "She walks dark path. Be careful." I know. Ursula's unease had been growing daily. May's help was invaluable, but her intensity was unsettling. But we need her. At least for now. Yes, for now. Chaska settled onto his blanket, his hand resting near his knife, even in sleep. But watch her. Trust only so far. Ursula lay awake long after Chaska's breathing evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering what shadows they were walking into. The night before they were to move on Dry Trestle, Ursula could not sleep. She slipped outside, needing air and space to think. The prairie stretched endlessly under a sky so vast and full of stars, it made her feel insignificant and infinite all at once. She found a flat rock on the hillside and sat pulling her thin coat tighter against the cold. A moment later, she heard footsteps, Chaska moving with the silent grace that still surprised her, despite weeks of traveling together. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, settling onto the rock beside her. Too many thoughts. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Then Chaska said, "Tell me about your father." The question caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because tomorrow we fight, and I would know more of the woman who fights beside me." Ursula felt her throat tighten. She had spoken of her father only briefly, in that desperate moment during the sandstorm. But now, with time and space to choose her words, she found herself wanting to share. "He was patient," she said. "Endlessly patient. When I was 8, I tangled a circuit so badly, it took him 2 days to untangle it. He never got angry, just showed me how to fix it and made me practice until I could do it right." She smiled at the memory. He believed women could do anything men could do if given the chance and the training. That belief cost him friends and business, but he never wavered. "He sounds like good man." He was. She paused. "He died when I was 18. Lung fever, sudden and brutal. 1 week he was fine, the next he was gone. My mother never recovered. She faded away over the next year until I was alone." Chaska nodded slowly. "My father died in battle against the Blue Coats when I was 16 winters. He taught me to hunt to track, to see what others miss. He said a warrior must have eyes that see and heart that feels, or he is just killer. Is that why you're so careful, why you watch everything?" "Yes. And because in these times, not watching means death." He turned to look at her, his face in shadow, but his eyes catching starlight. "Winona, my sister. She is all I have left of family. My mother died last winter. Pneumonia. Now, Winona burns with white man's disease, and I cannot reach her fast enough." Ursula heard the anguish beneath his controlled tone, the desperation he worked so hard to mask. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. This time, the gesture felt natural, earned through shared danger and growing trust. "We'll reach her," she said. "Dr. Pike will have what she needs. If we survive tomorrow. We'll survive." She said it with more confidence than she felt willing it to be true through sheer force of determination. Chaska's fingers tightened around hers. "When I first saw you with broken blade, I thought you were foolish. Who faces warrior with broken sword? Someone with no other choice. No, someone with courage." He paused. "I know courage when I see it. You have warrior heart, Ursula Hartwell. That is rare thing." The way he said her name, carefully pronouncing each syllable in a language not his own, made something warm bloom in her chest. They had come so far from that first confrontation, from suspicion and drawn steel to this quiet moment under stars. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of tomorrow, of what we'll find, of whether we're making the right choices." "Good. Fear keeps us sharp." Chaska shifted closer, his shoulder touching hers. "But fear alone is not enough. We must also have hope." "Do you have hope?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I hope my sister lives. I hope my people find peace. I hope—" He stopped, and even in the darkness, she could sense his hesitation. "I hope this is not last night I sit under stars with you." Ursula's breath caught. The admission was oblique, couched in the careful language of someone unused to expressing emotions openly. But its meaning was clear enough. "I hope that too," she said softly. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, hands clasped, shoulders touching, and the vast prairie night, bearing witness to something fragile and precious being born between two people who had every reason not to trust each other, but did anyway. Dawn broke cold and gray over dry trestle. Ursula, Chaska, May, and two of May's allies, farmhands, named Tom and Charlie, crouched in the rocks above the valley, watching the scene unfold below. 20 Lakota families had gathered near the trestle, drawn by word of a doctor bringing medicine. Women held children, elders sat in patient dignity, young men stood alert and wary. They had pitched temporary shelters and built small fires against the cold. They were vulnerable, trusting, waiting for help that was being weaponized against them. "There," Chaska said, pointing. In the distance, a column of smoke rose, the work engine approaching from the west. "Right on schedule," May murmured. Her face was set, her eyes glittering with something that made Ursula's instincts scream warnings. "Ursula, you remember how to set the charges?" "Yes." Ursula's hands were already moving, checking the wrapped bundles of black powder, the copper wire, the improvised detonator May had built from telegraph parts. "Good. Charlie, Tom, you'll help get the families clear once things start. Chaska, you'll need to keep Kincaid's men pinned. I'll handle Rook himself." Something in May's tone made Ursula look up sharply. "Handle however necessary." May met her gaze, and Ursula saw it clearly now, the darkness that had been lurking beneath the schoolteacher's helpful exterior. This was not about justice. This was about vengeance, pure and consuming. "May, we need to be careful." "Careful?" May's voice turned sharp. "I've been careful for 3 years. I've watched Rook destroy lives, buy off officials, kill anyone who got in his way. Today, that ends. Completely. What are you planning?" Chaska's voice was hard, suspicious. May pulled out a second bundle of black powder, much larger than what she had given Ursula. "The mine. Rook's entire operation is based there. I'm going to collapse it. All of it. Bury his equipment, his records, everything. That mine borders the settlement." Ursula said, her voice rising. "If you bring down the wrong section, you could trigger a landslide that destroys homes. Acceptable risk." May's tone was flat absolute. "No." Chaska stood, his hand on his knife. "We protect people, all people. That was agreement. The agreement was to stop Rook." May's face was hard as flint. "You want to save your sister, save your people? Then Rook's entire operation has to be destroyed so thoroughly he can never rebuild. That means the mine. That means taking risks." Ursula felt the situation spiraling out of control. May had been using them from the start, feeding them information, providing supplies, positioning them exactly where she wanted them. The helpful schoolteacher had been a mask for someone willing to sacrifice innocence for revenge. "We're not doing this." Ursula said, standing beside Chaska. Not your way. May's expression turned cold. Then you're fools, and you'll die fools. She gestured to Tom and Charlie. With me. We're going to finish this right. For a terrible moment, Ursula thought it would come to violence right there on the ridge. But Charlie stepped forward, his young face troubled. Miss May, I signed on to help folks not to. He glanced at the settlement below. My cousin lives down there. I can't. Then you're as weak as they are. May's voice was venomous. She grabbed her satchel of explosives and turned to go. When this is over, when Rook's still standing and your people are still dying, remember you chose mercy over justice. She stalked off down the ridge, Tom following reluctantly. Charlie stayed his face pale. She's going to do it anyway, he said. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. I thought she just wanted to expose Rook, but... He swallowed hard. She wants him dead, and she doesn't care who else dies. Chaska and Ursula exchanged glances. They had minutes, maybe less, before May triggered an explosion that could kill dozens of innocent people. We split up, Ursula said, her mind racing. Chaska, you get the families moving. Get them away from the trestle and the mine. Charlie, help him. I'll stop May. How? Charlie asked. I know explosives now, too. Ursula's mouth set in a grim line. And I know how to disrupt a circuit. Chaska gripped her shoulder. Be careful. She is dangerous. So am I. Ursula surprised herself with the fierce conviction in her voice. She was no longer the frightened woman who had fled Boston. She had been forged into something harder in the desert crucible. They split up. Chaska and Charlie raced down the slope toward the families, shouting warnings. Ursula ran toward the mine, following the path that May had taken, her heart pounding, but her hands steady. She found May at the mine entrance, working quickly to place charges along the support timbers. The older woman looked up as Ursula approached, her face flushed with excitement that bordered on madness. Come to help, good. We can finish this together. I came to stop you. Ursula's hand moved to the revolver at her belt. Step away from the explosives. May laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You won't shoot me. You're too soft. That's your weakness, Ursula. You still think mercy matters in this world. It's not weakness to refuse to murder innocent people. Innocent? May's face twisted. Everyone in that settlement works for Rook in some way. They profit from stolen land from murdered men like my husband. They're all guilty. Your husband wouldn't want this. Ursula kept her voice calm, trying to find some way to reach through the madness. Would he? For a moment, something flickered in May's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the ghost of the woman she had been before grief and rage consumed her. Then it hardened again. Don't presume to know what my husband would want. She turned back to the charges. Last chance. Help me or get out of my way. Ursula raised the revolver. Her hands did not shake. I can't let you do this. May's hand moved with surprising speed, pulling a small pistol from her apron pocket. Then I guess we both make our choices. The standoff hung balanced on a knife's edge. Then from below, a new sound, the crack of gunfire, sharp and sustained. Rook's men had arrived and opened fire on the families. Both women's heads snapped toward the sound. In that instant of distraction, Ursula moved. She lunged forward and grabbed the wire leading to May's detonator, yanking it free. The connection broke with a spark. May screamed in fury and fired. The bullet passed so close to Ursula's head that she felt the heat of it. She dove behind a pile of timbers as May fired again, then scrambled deeper into the mine entrance, pulling the wires as she went systematically destroying May's setup. Behind her, May was screaming words that might have been curses or might have been something more broken. But Ursula did not stop until every charge was disconnected, every wire severed. Only when she was certain the mine was safe did she emerge gun-ready. May was gone. Ursula could see her running back toward the trestle, toward the sounds of battle. Toward Rook. Ursula ran after her. The scene at Dry Trestle was chaos. Rook's work engine sat on the tracks, smoke billowing from its stack. Armed men poured from the boxcars, firing into the crowd of families who were trying to flee. Chaska was in the midst of it, the Spencer carbine barking as he provided covering fire, helping people reach the shelter of the arroyo. Ursula saw Deputy Kincaid riding through the chaos, his face twisted with hatred as he aimed his rifle at a fleeing woman with a child in her arms. Without thinking, Ursula raised her revolver and fired. The shot went wide. She was no marksman, but it was close enough to make Kincaid's horse rear, spoiling his aim. Kincaid's head snapped toward her, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He wheeled his horse and charged directly at her. Ursula ran. She had 2 shots left in the revolver, maybe 1 good cartridge, and Kincaid was bearing down on her with murder in his eyes. She sprinted toward a jumble of Boulder's bullets, kicking up dirt at her heels. Then Chaska was there, stepping into Kincaid's path with the kind of calm certainty that stopped the deputy short. Kincaid dismounted, drawing a long knife, and the 2 men circled each other like wolves. "You should have stayed on the reservation, Chief," Kincaid growled. "Would have lived longer." "You should have stayed honest, Deputy," Chaska replied. "Would have died cleaner." They came together in a clash of steel and fury. The fight was brutal, stripped of any pretense of honor or rules. Kincaid had size and weight, and a burning hatred born from some old wound. Chaska had skill and speed and desperation. They grappled trading blows that would have felled lesser men. Kincaid drove his knee into Chaska's ribs, and Ursula heard the crack even from yards away. Chaska's response was immediate, a vicious elbow to Kincaid's throat that left the deputy gasping. But Kincaid rallied his greater bulk, allowing him to drive Chaska to the ground. They rolled through the dirt, each seeking advantage. Kincaid got his hands around Chaska's throat, his face purple with effort and rage. "This is for my brother," Kincaid hissed. "The one your people killed at the Yellowstone." So there it was, the personal hatred that had driven Kincaid beyond simple greed. Ursula understood in that moment that no appeal to mercy or reason would work. Kincaid had come here to kill, and he would not stop until he did, or until he was stopped. She grabbed the broken saber. She had retrieved it from Iron Ridge days ago, carrying it as a talisman, and drove the hilt into Kincaid's temple with all her strength. The impact jarred her arm to the shoulder, but it worked. Kincaid's grip loosened, and Chaska rolled free, gasping and coughing. Kincaid staggered to his feet, blood running down the side of his face, and reached for his revolver. Chaska was faster. His knife flashed once a silver arc in the afternoon light, and Kincaid went down with a look of surprise frozen on his face. Chaska stood over him, breathing hard blood running from his mouth and nose. His ribs were cracked, at minimum possibly broken. But he was alive. "Come," he said to Ursula, his voice rough. "We must find Rook." They did not have to search long. Edison Rook stood on the platform of his work engine, a Winchester rifle in his hands, surveying the chaos he had created with the detached interest of a man watching ants burn under a magnifying glass. May Trumbull was climbing the engine, her face set with deadly purpose, a knife in her hand. "No!" Ursula shouted, but her voice was lost in the gunfire and screams. May reached the platform and lunged at Rook. He turned, surprise flashing across his face, and fired. The shot took May in the shoulder, spinning her around, but she did not fall. With her last strength, she stabbed upward, the knife catching Rook in the side. Both of them collapsed onto the platform, locked together in a final embrace of hatred and vengeance. Ursula and Chaska reached the engine and climbed up. May was still alive, barely blood pooling beneath her. Rook was gasping, his face gray, his hands pressed to the wound in his side. "May," Ursula said, dropping to her knees beside the older woman. Why couldn't you let justice handle it?" May's eyes found hers, and for a moment the madness cleared, leaving only a tired woman who had lost everything that mattered. "Because justice is slow," she whispered, "and I couldn't wait anymore. Couldn't." She coughed, blood flecking her lips. "Tell the children, tell them I'm sorry I couldn't finish the term." Then she was gone, her eyes still open, staring at nothing. Ursula felt tears sting her eyes, not for the vengeful woman May had become, but for the grieving widow she had been for the teacher who had cared for children and kept accurate attendance records and rang the bell each morning with clockwork precision. Rook was still alive, though fading. Chaska stood over him, the knife in his hand, and Ursula saw the war playing out in his eyes and the desire for vengeance against the man who had threatened his people weighed against something deeper, something harder to define. "Don't," Ursula said softly. "He's finished. Let the law handle it." "Your law has not handled him before?" "I know. But if you kill him now, you become the thing they say you are. You become the savage they fear." Chaska's jaw tightened. For a long moment she thought he would do it anyway. Then slowly he lowered the knife. "For you," he said quietly. "I do this for you." Rook tried to speak, but only blood came out. He would not last long without medical attention, and that attention was not coming fast enough. In the end, nature and May's blade would accomplish what the law had failed to do. The aftermath stretched across days. Federal marshals arrived, summoned by a runner May had sent, before she descended into her final darkness. They took statements, collected evidence, and arrested what remained of Rook's men. The mine owner himself died before he could be transported to stand trial. May's knife had struck deeper than anyone realized. Dr. Ezra Pike arrived on the scene, having been released from his enforced guard at Red Butte when Rook's operation collapsed. He treated the wounded Lakota and settler alike and distributed vaccination kit cowpox lymph that would stem the smallpox outbreak. He worked with a quiet efficiency that spoke of a man who had seen too much suffering and refused to grow numb to it. Chaska's sister, Winona, was brought to dry trestle from the main camp. The fever still burned in her, but Pike administered the vaccination kit, cowpox lymph, and the precious laudanum for the pain carbolic to clean wounds and careful nursing. And over the following days, she began to improve. Ursula watched Chaska sit beside his sister's bedside, his stern face softening as he sang songs in his own language. And she felt her heart contract with an emotion she was afraid to name. The lead marshal, a weathered man named Fletcher, with intelligent eyes, called Ursula aside on the third day after the battle. "Miss Hartwell, I have news from Boston." He handed her a telegram. "The charges against you have been dropped. Horace Bellingham has been indicted for fraud and theft. You're free to return east if you choose." Ursula stared at the telegram, feeling a complex tangle of emotions. Freedom, vindication, the possibility of reclaiming her old life. But when she looked across the temporary camp to where Chaska was helping rebuild a family's shelter, his movements careful because of his cracked ribs, she knew with absolute certainty that Boston was no longer home. "I'll stay," she said. "There's work here that needs doing." Marshal Fletcher nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Figured as much. Well, you'll be needed. The telegraph companies are desperate for operators they can trust. Your name's been cleared in more ways than one word's gotten around about what you did here." He paused, his expression growing serious. "One more thing. May Trumbull. We found papers in her house. She'd been planning this for years, every detail, every contingency. Her husband really was killed by Rook's people, that part was true. But she'd let it consume her until there was nothing left but the hunger for revenge. He looked at Ursula with something like sympathy. Just wanted you to know you couldn't have saved her. She'd already saved herself long before you met. Ursula nodded, accepting this truth. May had made her choices, and those choices had led to her end. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when grief turned toxic. 2 weeks after the battle, as the valley settled into a fragile peace, Chaska was finally strong enough to travel. His ribs were healing, though they would ache for months. Winona was well enough to ride the smallpox scars, fading to mere marks, rather than the disfiguring pox that had threatened to claim her life. The morning they were to leave, Ursula walked with Chaska up to the ridge above Dry Trestle. The valley spread below them, peaceful in the early light. The trestle had been repaired. The families had returned to their camps. Dr. Pike had established a permanent medical station with funding the territorial government had been shamed into providing. "You did good work here," Chaska said, looking out over the valley. "You saved many lives." "We saved lives," Ursula corrected. "Both of us." "Yes, together." He turned to face her fully. "My sister lives because of you. My people were saved because of you. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing." Ursula's throat felt tight. "We were partners. That's how partnership works." Chaska reached out and took her hand, and the gesture natural now after weeks of shared danger and growing intimacy. "What will you do now?" "I've leased land for a telegraph station. May's schoolhouse has been given to me to run. The town council decided I was the logical choice. I'll teach children Morse code and mathematics, and I'll maintain the telegraph lines." She paused. "It's honest work. It's enough." "It is more than enough." Chaska's thumb traced the back of her hand, and the touch sending warmth through her despite the cool morning air. "Ursula Hartwell, I must tell you something." "I'm listening." "In my language there is word mitakuye. It means all my relations. It speaks of connections between all living things, the bonds that make us more than alone." He struggled with the English word, searching for the right way to express what he felt. Since we fought together, you have become part of my mitakuye. You are no longer a stranger. You are." He stopped, frustration crossing his face. "I understand," Ursula said softly, squeezing his hand. "You're part of mine too. My relations. My family." Relief washed over his features. Then he grew serious again. "My band moves with the seasons. We cannot stay in one place. The reservation closes in, but we are not ready to surrender that much. I will be traveling sometimes for many months." "I know." Ursula had been preparing herself for this. "But you'll come back. Every season I can. Spring for certain, the pass is clear, and travel becomes possible." He moved closer, his free hand rising to cup her face. "Each time I return, I will come to you first. You will be my anchor in this changing world. And you'll be mine." Ursula leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his palm and the warmth of his skin. "I'll build something here, Chaska. Something that lasts. A place where you and your people can come for news, for help, for shelter. A place that's safe. You would do this." "I already am." She smiled. "I'm not the same woman who knelt in the dust with a broken blade, afraid of everything. You helped me become someone stronger. Someone who stays and fights." Chaska's expression softened in a way she had rarely seen, the hard mask of the warrior falling away to reveal the man beneath. "When we first met, I thought I would have to kill you or be killed. I did not expect." He stopped, searching for words again. "Neither did I," Ursula said. "But I'm glad we were both wrong." He leaned down, slowly giving her time to pull away if she chose. She did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once, carrying the weight of everything they had survived together, every danger faced and overcome, every moment of trust, hard won in a brutal land. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Chaska rested his forehead against hers, the gesture that had become their private language, more intimate than words. "I will come back," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every spring, every season I can. I will come back to you. I'll be here." Ursula's eyes burned with unshed tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Building our future, waiting for you." They stood together on the ridge as the sun climbed higher. Two people who had started as enemies and become something far more complex. Partners, allies, and now something deeper that had no single word to encompass it. The wind sang through the valley, carrying the sounds of life resuming its rhythms, children laughing, hammers ringing on metal, the distant whistle of a train. Below them, Winona waited with the other members of Chaska's band, her young face still bearing the marks of smallpox, but alive, smiling whole. She waved up at them, and Chaska raised his hand in acknowledgement. "She wants to meet you properly," he said. "To thank you. I'd like that." Ursula laced her fingers through his, holding on for one last moment before they had to descend and face the goodbyes. "In the spring," Chaska said, "I will teach you to track, to read the land as I do. There is much you do not yet know about surviving in this country. And I'll teach you more about the telegraph codes, the ones the army doesn't publish." Ursula managed a smile despite the ache in her chest. "We'll trade knowledge. Yes, and other things." He kissed her again, and this time it carried the bittersweet taste of parting of time, suspended between goodbye and the promise of reunion. Finally, they descended the ridge together. At the bottom, Winona ran to meet them, her dark eyes bright and curious as she studied Ursula. "You are the one who helped my brother save me," she said in careful English, then added something in Lakota that made Chaska's eyes widen. "What did she say?" Ursula asked. Chaska looked slightly embarrassed. "She says you have good face and should come visit our camp so she can teach you proper language and proper cooking." Ursula laughed at the sound, surprising her with its genuine joy. "Tell her I would be honored. In the spring, perhaps?" Chaska translated, and Winona beamed. Then the girl grew serious and spoke again in Lakota, her young voice carrying weight. "She says," Chaska translated, "that the stars showed her you would come, that you were meant to save us." He paused. "She sometimes has visions. The elders call her a dreamer." Ursula felt a chill run down her spine, not of fear, but of something like recognition. Perhaps their meeting had been fated, or perhaps it was simply that two desperate people had found each other at exactly the right moment and had chosen to fight together rather than apart. It did not matter which was true. What mattered was what they chose to do next. "Tell her," Ursula said, crouching down to meet Winona's eyes, "that I'm glad the stars were right." They left an hour later, the band moving north in a column that seemed to merge with the landscape itself. Ursula stood outside her new telegraph station, watching until they disappeared over the horizon. Chaska had looked back once, raising his hand in farewell, and she had done the same. Then they were gone, and she was alone again. But not as alone as she had been before. She had purpose now. She had a place. She had the promise of return. Inside the station, the telegraph began clicking with the day's messages. Ursula went to work, her hands moving with practiced efficiency over the keys, translating the electronic pulses into meaning. Outside, the settlement was rebuilding. Children played in the street. The saloon was doing brisk business. Life continued as it always did, resilient and stubborn. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Ursula sat at her small desk and began a letter to her mother's sister back in Boston and the one relative who had believed in her innocence. She wrote about the territories, about the work she was doing, about the future she was building. She did not mention Chaska by name. Some things were too new, too precious to expose to judgment or misunderstanding. But she wrote, "I have found friends here in the unlikeliest places. I have learned that trust must be earned through action, that courage can be discovered in desperation, and that sometimes the people we fear most are the ones we come to rely on." She sealed the letter and set it aside for the next mail coach. Then she lit the lamp and returned to her telegraph, listening to the clicks and pulses that connected her to the wider world, while anchoring her in this specific place. Spring would come. It always did. And when it came, when the passes cleared and the prairie grass turned green, Chaska would return. They would have time, then time to build on the foundation they had laid in blood, and fire time to explore what this thing between them might become. For now, it was enough to know he was alive, his sister was healed, his people were safe. It was enough to have a place to call homework that mattered, a future that stretched forward with possibility rather than fear. Ursula Hartwell, formerly of Boston, now of Dry Trestle in the Wyoming Territory, sat at her telegraph and smiled. She had survived. More than that, she had prevailed. And she had found in the most unlikely way exactly where she was meant to be. The broken saber hung on the wall above her desk, cleaned, wrapped in oiled cloth, a reminder of the question that had hung between her and Chaska in that first dangerous moment. End me, or make me yours. They had chosen the latter. And in doing so, they had both been transformed. Outside, the stars were emerging one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere to the north, Chaska was making camp, looking up at the same stars, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him. The telegraph clicked. Ursula's hands moved across the keys, translating, transcribing, connecting. Her life had purpose now. Her heart had direction. And in the spring, when the wind turned warm and the geese flew north, she would be waiting.